Hello, gorgeous seekers, and welcome to Moon Magic and a discussion about a full moon that I always consider one of the more intense full moons of the year. It's the Aries full moon, and it is happening on October 1st, starting our month of October off with a bright, intense illumination, right? And you think about the moon in Aries, this is going to be a bold moon. This is going to be an opinionated moon. This is going to be an authentic moon that's not so concerned with tact or diplomacy or, keeping it together or pretending to be something that you're not in order to make other people comfortable. This is going to be a moon that really wants us to come back to something truer and deeper within ourselves. It's not just about floating around and being a concept for others, right? And I think this is kind of a powerful time to discuss this in many ways, because there's a lot of arguing and yelling and frustration going on in the world. And sometimes I think we think of like Aries energy as being conflict focused, conflict hungry, not just like Aries as people, but the energy of it, right? That there's kind of this desire to be right, to put our foot forward, to make sure that we have the upper hand in an argument. There's kind of a reputation for authenticity to sometimes come off as this thing where you have to be really loud and let everybody know what you think, right? But I think for me, when I think about this full moon, that is not what I mean by authenticity. That is not what I mean by being like true to yourself, or not wearing a whole bunch of disguises to make other people comfortable. When I think about the type of authenticity I'm talking about, I'm really discussing when we aren't self-abandoning, right? Which is such a common thing that many of us do, is to self-abandon in the name of maybe what we think people want us to be, or the way we think we're supposed to be, or the way that we think we're supposed to get the work done, or the way we think we're supposed to show up in life. And we so often put ourselves through these little tunnels and obstacle courses, never even really knowing if that's truly what people want from us or not. We just assume that it is. So the theme this moon is going to be about self-abandonment. And part of the reason that is we have this moon lit up at 9 degrees of Aries, opposing the sun at 9 degrees of Libra. And the moon and Chiron are very close. They're 2 degrees apart. Chiron is at 7 degrees of Aries, and the moon is at 9 degrees of Aries. And so even the lead up, the day before the exact moon, the time around the shift from September to October, this conversation with moon and Chiron is going to be ongoing. This moon is also happening during Mars retrograde in Aries. So we're doing something really important just in general during October that has to do with coming back home to like a core self, right? Coming back home to something deeper and wiser and softer and clearer. And this moon really wants that. So Chiron, whenever Chiron is involved here, we're doing work with healing. We're doing work with healing how we think of something that is a flaw, a limitation, an essential defect is actually the very medicine from which we can heal ourselves and the world. So, you think about maybe you are somebody who doesn't fit like some kind of standard ideal of beauty, right? Which who does fit those? I mean, that's all BS, and that's a whole other conversation. But just say that, that's something that's coming up, right? And you think of that as something that stops you from pursuing what you want in the world, right? And most of us have something like this that we see in ourselves as something that makes it so that we aren't allowed to move forward in our lives. Chiron energy flips that on its head and says, no, this is the very thing This is the very thing people want to share with you, that people are intrigued by. This is also the very thing that makes you so lovable just from within yourself. Not even just getting approval from outside, but something that is really something that you can build and understand from your experiences, your viewpoint, all of that, right? And so Chiron, because he's the wounded healer, he's a wise teacher. That's the mythology and the element we're working with when we're working with Chiron. This moon too, full moons are honest, right? They illuminate, they help us see something, they help us come to peace with something, a conclusion about something, they help us to get some perspective as we see that illumination, as we close out a lunar cycle. So these two really want us to see us fully for who we are and not try to edit it away, strip it away. You know, what it makes me think of is there's been, and this has been going on for years, right? But I think about all the apps, like photo editing apps, so that, you know, people look a lot thinner and they have like smooth skin, and there's a lot of controversy over how we allow filters and what's real, like what's real anymore. You know, what is it to be in a human body? What is that? What is the value of that? What does that mean? I think when I think about healing, when I think about kind of Mars retrograde and all this energy in Aries, which has so much to do with, you know, kind of being a warrior on the ground, moving through the world. I think in some ways, with the technological acceleration over the last 20 years, one of the things that's happened is we've become a little uncomfortable with the physicality of just being a human being in a body, living this life. We've wanted to kind of erase that part of it. And this moon is kind of bringing us back home to that on a real visceral front, right? Coming back home to our own bodies. But this is also about self-abandonment in the way we think about ourselves, in the way we think about our value, in the way we judge ourselves and therefore judge others. I think this year has brought up a huge amount of judgment on ourselves, right? And yes, on others too. There's been a lot of judgment and shame as themes. And I think one of the big questions that comes up to mind to me as I'm kind of watching everything unfold, how is the shame and the judging working for us? Is it doing anything productive? Because I'm struggling to see the results that come from using those as the dominant thing to get beautiful things happening in life, right? And this goes for the macro, the collective, as well as on our individual front. And often when I'm talking in these videos, this is about the work we do with ourselves, right? And you know, I don't remember the last time that like shame and judgment on myself has helped me to flourish or be a better creator or be a better, a happier, more full, light-filled person, right? And so this moon is gonna really be asking that question deeply. Is that working for you? And it's also going to be inviting you to come home to yourself, right? Come back to yourself. You will be welcomed, you will be loved, you will be held. You don't have to keep running away, right? Another thing that's going on kind of in the background of this moon, it's not in conjunction with this moon, it's just happening at the same time of this moon, is that Mars will be loosely squaring both Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn. And this is kind of a theme that's been going on for several weeks. Mars has been in conversation with energy in Saturn for a while during his retrograde. But this is another honest aspect. A square like this is going to ask us to come back to an empowerment that comes from a place of deep self-respect, right? Deep self-respect, deep self-understanding. And once again, self-respect, it's not about being right, right? It's not about having the upper hand. It's not about making sure everybody else knows what you think and that, you know, right? Like sometimes we think if I'm respecting myself, that means that I need to make sure that people know, right? And the first step in this moon, and I think, is to be really quiet with yourself and have that knowing deep down in a really kind and loving way. what comes from being in that space is where interesting conversations come, is where interesting solutions come from. And sometimes I think we want to skip over that part of coming back to ourselves before we get out there and move. So this moon is a reflective time. I think too, this moon hits on something that the Aries Libra axis in general brings up. You know, Aries traditionally represents the self, and Libra represents relation to other, right? So one being, two beings, and how those two things are one and the same, but they're also this never-ending loop, right? When we have self-respect and we love ourselves and we can be fully with ourselves, it opens the gate to being with others. And vice versa, when we allow ourselves to give to others, when we allow ourselves to be kind and loving and give forward in life, we're really nourishing ourselves, right? And I think that that never-ending loop between the two, and finding a harmonious balance between the two, is one of the essential things that we're trying to figure out in any given day in this life and throughout our lifetime. The Emperor wanted to come out. I'm going to pull 2 more cards and we'll talk through this. So this really comes back to an essential thing about what true self-love and self-respect means and what service to others means. And they both have to be temperance, balance, right? Alchemy, divine alchemy. They both have to be well developed enough to hold space in the process. And Page of Cups. As you can see, the cards here are speaking to that healing, nourishing, coming back to something deep and profound and full of self-respect. And there is a really strong call here to come back to something simpler and clearer, right? We're often looking for the complex ways to allow ourselves to love ourselves. We're looking for the complex explanations for why we think somebody's wrong or why we feel that we need to be like scrambling around coming up with these like angry or frustrated stories. And this moon is like, there's something else to check in with, right? There's one place we can check in with. Now, there's lots of tools. There's lots of ways of expressing ourselves in life. I'm not advocating for just staying in one kind of like turning into a hermit and just meditating and floating around. But interestingly enough, this moon just wants us to come back to a deep sense of self-love and self-respect. And that unfolds as a way to commune with all of us. And right now we're needing that type of energy to be cultivated in each one of us so that we can come together, right? Because we can't really do that if we're feeling angry and frustrated with ourselves. So Emperor, to me, once again, this is a full moon in Aries, and I think the Emperor speaks to that clearly. You know, full moon in Aries is full of determination, it's full of grit, focus, drive, clarity, ambition. There is a sense here of like seeing, you know, it's a moonlit night and you're on the freeway and you can see where you're driving to, right, in the moonlight. And there's kind of that understanding that you can see something clearly. You can hold your vision, hold your understanding in a really solid place in this process. But what's really interesting to me is that, yes, the Emperor is stubborn, is clear, is ambitious. And there is this self-understanding and this self-respect that comes from kind of imbibing and intoning that kind of energy in ourselves. It's a really powerful one, especially if you've been trained into the feminine way of being, which is to keep yourself small and keep yourself meek and keep yourself in a certain container. Activating Emperor energy can be huge. But here's the thing, the Emperor energy, when used in a constructive, powerful, healing, self-respecting way, actually requires getting to that place, getting to the Emperor via this process in the background. Temperance to me is really interesting because, you know, temperance is another fiery energy. This is about if you had a blazing flame and you found a way to kind of calm that fire down, right? Which is pretty appropriate right now in the world as I'm saying that. So that it's a quiet, warm flame that you can warm your hands on, that isn't singeing the world. Temperance has to do with tempering, you know, finding the right temperature, finding the right balance, and taking something that maybe we want to burn something down, we want to destroy something, and pulling it back and actually listening to what is going on behind the thunder and the fire and the feelings and the emotions and the desire for control, right? And coming back to a place of deeper wisdom. And that's really where the Emperor gets activated. It's not in the self-righteousness, right? It's not in the being right. It's not in just being angry. It's in this deeper place of understanding. Whenever I see temperance too, I always think is this angel at the river of life, you know, feeding these beautiful mixtures into these goblets. And I think about the deeper ancestral wisdom that we can listen into when we're in a temperance state, and coming back into a much more spiritual, holistic understanding of this whole process. Now, Page of Cups is a positive news bringer, right? He comes bearing gifts. He comes bearing understanding. He comes bearing good emotional news. And I think with the clarity, the crystal clarity of this moon, this is a moon that really, it's not trying to pull us into the watery depths and get us confused and have us just floating out into kind of a Neptunian kind of vibe or something like that. This moon is very crisp, clear, authentic. With that does come good news, right? I think sometimes when we're willing to come back home to ourselves, we can see again. We can see what's going on. We can see how we fit into it. We can see what gifts we have to give. We come back to ourselves. We come home with that self-respect and that deep self-understanding. Suddenly, you know, you're in the middle of all these big swells of energy and shift. You can see it and understand it, right? In a way that is impossible or very difficult when we feel scattered and shattered, which it plays on the themes that were coming up for the Virgo new moon last month that had to do with, instead of shattering yourself into a whole bunch of tiny pieces and being everywhere, coming back into that wholeness of yourself, this Aries full moon completes that cycle for us and has us coming back to the self. And this is what's so interesting. You know, Aries energy is so much about the self, the individual, and the fully integrated individual is one that just feels so okay with themselves that there doesn't need to be this constant definition of who they are, right? Now, this is all an ideal, this is all an energetic phase, this is all something that we're going to be playing with and working with, but the cards here and the energy here are quite clear, precise, and positive. So I'm so excited to see what this full moon brings. I hope you have a beautiful time. We'll of course be doing our activation over on my Patreon, as well as continuing to dive deep on Mars retrograde and prepping for Mercury retrograde, which is starting in October as well. So we are, you know, this full moon starts the adventure off right. So if you're interested in joining me on Patreon, I would love to see you there. We have such a great time. You can find PinkLune's gorgeous jewelry, and you can also find me on Instagram and on my website. I will see you all so soon for more magic, more fun, and more curious beginnings in our October readings. I love you so much. Talk to you soon.